The morning started like any other, or at least I thought it would. I woke to the familiar creak of our bedroom floor, the soft hum of sunlight spilling through the blinds, and the faint aroma of coffee drifting from the kitchen. But the quiet was different that day. There was tension in the air I couldn't immediately place. I turned toward the other side of the bed and found it empty, which wasn't unusual if she'd left early for work. But then I noticed the note, hastily scribbled on a sticky pad, clinging to the nightstand. It said, "I can't do this anymore. Pack your things. You're leaving today." My hands froze over the coffee mug I hadn't even poured yet. I read it 3 times, thinking the words might change if I looked hard enough. They didn't. I felt the world contract into the small, sterile bedroom, every heartbeat thudding like a warning drum. My wife had thrown me out, not in anger, not in a heated argument that could be discussed or reconciled, but because of lies she believed. A story spun by the one person I had thought would never betray me, her son. I can't explain the shock that hits when someone you trusted completely decides to erase you from their life without a conversation. There's a moment when your brain refuses to accept reality, when denial grips every nerve and you walk around expecting it all to be a bad dream. I spent hours pacing that apartment, my hands trembling, my mind racing. Every memory of us, every moment I had thought was built on trust and love, suddenly felt like fragile glass, ready to shatter with the slightest touch. I tried to call her once, twice, 3 times. Each ring answered by the cold, automated voicemail she had activated just a week prior. The sound was deafening, a mechanical confirmation of the personal collapse I was experiencing. Then I called her son, hoping for some logic, some chance to unravel the story he'd told. But he was smug, almost proud, as if he'd orchestrated some victory by driving a wedge between us. That's when I realized the war I hadn't even known had been brewing. Packing my things was mechanical, robotic. I moved through our apartment as though I were already a ghost. The clothes I folded, the photos I boxed, even the small trinkets I held in my hands were all relics of a life that no longer existed. I didn't leave quietly because I wanted to disappear. I left quietly because rage and grief were more dangerous than anything else I had felt in my life. I remember stopping by the kitchen, staring at the coffee machine, and realizing that the smell that had once symbolized warmth and morning routines now mocked me, an aroma of betrayal and lost years. Driving away from that apartment, I didn't have a destination. The city blurred past me, lights flickering like the remnants of memories I couldn't grasp. I tried to rationalize, tried to understand how someone I had loved and trusted could believe lies so easily. But rational thought is fragile when faced with emotional devastation. My mind refused to settle, circling endlessly around what I should have seen, what I should have done, and why the one person I thought would always stand with me chose to believe a narrative constructed out of malice. In the first few days, I stayed with a friend who didn't ask too many questions, who offered a bed and silence instead of pity. I needed that, silence. I didn't want advice. I didn't want consolation. I wanted the world to pause so I could process the fact that my marriage, my life, had been upended by someone else's lies. Every time my phone buzzed, I flinched, hoping it wasn't her checking in, because I wasn't ready for her. Not yet. Not until I could measure the damage. Not until I could reclaim my sense of self without the interference of her misguided loyalty to someone who had no right to dictate our lives. The lies were simple but powerful. Small exaggerations about my character, about my intentions, twisted until they appeared monstrous. I had always been careful, always transparent, but truth is no match for the perception someone wants to hold on to, and my wife, blinded by her son's convictions, became the perfect vessel for them. Each lie was a nail in the coffin of our marriage, driven home by someone she trusted implicitly, someone I had tried to include, guide, and protect. The irony burned like acid in my chest. I had always tried to build a bridge, to create a family where honesty and communication were paramount. Instead, I was left staring at the ruins, wondering when the foundation had cracked and why I hadn't seen the fault lines earlier. In the solitude of my temporary refuge, I started to rebuild the narrative in my mind. I cataloged every interaction, every argument, Every moment that could be twisted into fodder for falsehood. It was exhausting, painstaking work, but necessary. To let it go unexamined would be to surrender the last shred of dignity I had left. I refused to play the victim, refused to allow my anger to define me. Instead, I focused on clarity, on precision, on understanding the dynamics that had allowed this betrayal to flourish. 3 weeks passed in this limbo. No contact from her, no acknowledgement of the chaos she had caused, the home she had upended. And then one day the call came, her voice soft, hesitant, almost fragile. I, I wanted to see if you'd reflected, she said. The phrase hit me like a punch to the gut. Reflected? Was she suggesting that she had been wrong to throw me out? Or was this an attempt to manipulate, to test the waters and see if I had softened? I stayed silent, letting her words hang in the space between us like smoke. She continued, unaware of the storm brewing on the other end of the line, unaware that the power balance had shifted entirely. By this point, I had spent weeks preparing, mentally rehearsing every possible scenario. I had rebuilt my boundaries, reinforced my sense of self, and rehearsed the words that would finally cut through the web of lies and misplaced loyalties. When I finally spoke, my voice was calm, measured, the kind of calm that comes from knowing your position is unassailable. I have reflected, I said, and I've made my decision. There was a pause long enough for the weight of anticipation to press down on both of us. I could hear her inhale sharply, and then, before she could speak, I continued. I'm filing for divorce. The papers are ready. You'll have them delivered today. The line went silent. The pause stretched, suffocating and tense, until finally her son's voice exploded through, shrill and panicked, betraying the control he thought he had over the situation. He shouted, accused, tried to deflect blame, but the momentum had shifted. The betrayal he had orchestrated had lost its leverage. His mother's confidence in his narrative, the very thing that had enabled him to manipulate and divide, crumbled under the weight of my decision. I didn't raise my voice. I didn't beg or plead. I simply stood firm, knowing that this was no longer a negotiation. It was the reckoning. And as I hung up the phone, the magnitude of what had just occurred hit me. The son who had driven this wedge, who had thrived on chaos and manipulation, had lost his grip. The woman who had believed him was now faced with the reality of the consequences, and I had reclaimed the only thing that truly mattered, my autonomy, my integrity, my right to dictate my life on my own terms. The rest of that day passed in a surreal haze. I walked through the city streets, observing couples, families, the ebb and flow of life that continued unabated despite my personal upheaval. There was a strange solace in it, a reminder that while one chapter had ended in betrayal and heartbreak, the story itself was far from over. The future was mine to shape, and for the first time in weeks, I felt the fragile stirrings of control return. Not vengeance, not anger, just clarity. A recognition that some truths, no matter how painful, are necessary for survival. And so as the sun dipped below the skyline, casting long shadows across the pavement, I made a silent vow to myself. No more lies, no more manipulation, no more interference from those who seek to control through deceit. My life would continue on my terms, built not on the shifting sands of trust betrayed, but on the solid rock of truth and self-respect. The next few days were a strange mixture of anticipation and calm. I knew the papers had been delivered. There was no uncertainty there. But I also knew that the storm they would unleash was inevitable. Her son had been the architect of this betrayal, and I had dismantled his blueprint in a single, deliberate act. Now it was only a matter of watching the pieces fall where they would. She called again, her voice trembling this time. It wasn't the composed, self-assured tone I remembered. It was laced with fear, confusion, and something close to regret. Why? Why are you doing this? She whispered, as though the concept of standing up for myself was foreign to her. I didn't rush to comfort her. I didn't apologize for asserting boundaries that should never have been in question. Instead, I let the weight of my own words sink into the space between us. Because the lies, the manipulation, they can't continue. I tried to be patient. I tried to see the good in both of you. But enough is enough. Her silence was deafening. I knew she had to confront not just my decision, but the truth about the son who had convinced her to throw me out. I had no intention of explaining or negotiating. My actions were the explanation. Sometimes clarity comes not from argument, but from irrevocable choice. Then the calls came from him. The son who had believed himself untouchable, who had thought his ability to control and deceive could dictate the lives of others, finally began to unravel. At first it was subtle. Sharp, frustrated questions. Why are you doing this? Why won't you just forgive? But soon his voice rose into the high-pitched hysteria of someone watching their control slip away. You can't just take this from us, he yelled. Mom won't. She can't. She has to see reason. I stayed calm, deliberately silent for a moment, letting his fury crash over the line. In that moment, I realized something fundamental. When someone bases their power on lies, the truth is the ultimate weapon, and I had wielded it with precision. Mom will see reason when it matters, I said finally, my voice calm but cutting, and you'll see your actions have consequences. He sputtered as though my words were foreign to him, concepts he had never encountered. He had grown used to fear bending others to his will, to manipulating reality until everyone around him obeyed the story he told. But in that moment, the veneer cracked. He had lost his leverage, and with it, his sense of invincibility. In the following days, the practicalities of the divorce began. Lawyers, documents, signatures, each step deliberate, controlled, professional. I wasn't interested in dragging it out to hurt anyone. My intention was precision, finality, and maintaining my dignity. Every interaction reinforced the reality I had been denied for so long, that I was reclaiming my life, that the narrative had shifted irrevocably, and that the manipulation that had driven a wedge between my wife and me could no longer stand. I won't lie, it was painful. Every signature, every procedural step carried echoes of the home I had once cherished, the future I had imagined, and the trust I had placed in someone who ultimately betrayed it. But pain, I reminded myself, was not weakness. Pain was the witness to truth, and truth had a way of cutting through deception sharper than any anger could. Her son called again, and this time his voice was trembling, not with fury, but with the recognition of impending loss. You're ruining everything, he shouted, but there was no conviction behind it, no control, only panic. I listened for a moment, letting the sound of someone unmasked reach me fully. This was the same person who had orchestrated my exile, who had thrived on chaos and deceit. Now stripped of manipulation, his power evaporated. And I understood then the full magnitude of the situation. Sometimes those who build walls of lies find themselves trapped inside them, powerless when reality finally pierces the illusion. By the end of the second week, the divorce was official. Papers signed, conditions agreed upon, the division of assets precise and deliberate. I felt no gloating satisfaction. Instead, there was a clarity, a profound understanding that justice does not always roar. Sometimes it is quiet, inevitable, and unavoidable. I had not sought vengeance. I had sought truth, and the truth had done what my words alone could not. When the news reached her son, I could hear the fracture in his voice over the phone. He could no longer manipulate, no longer dominate, no longer twist reality to his liking. His mother's loyalty, once unquestioning, had been tested and redirected. He lashed out one final time, accusing, pleading, threatening, but it was futile. I remained unmoved. I had learned something invaluable. The strongest boundaries are not maintained through anger, but through consistency, clarity, and unwavering adherence to truth. After everything, the silence that followed was almost sacred. The absence of chaos, the absence of manipulation, was a relief I had not known I could feel. I walked through the city streets once more, noting the small, ordinary details, the rustle of leaves, the hum of traffic, the distant laughter of strangers. Life continued, indifferent to the personal battles that had consumed me for weeks. But now, I observed it as a free man, no longer bound by deception or coerced loyalty, able to move forward with my own narrative, my own autonomy, my own unshakable dignity. Reflecting on it all, I understood the cruel efficiency of lies, the fragility of trust when manipulated, and the resilience required to reclaim one's life after betrayal. But I also understood something more profound. Control is never truly lost, so long as it rests in the hands of someone who refuses to compromise their principles. I had been tested, thrown out, challenged, and belittled, but in the end, I had emerged not as a victim, but as the architect of my own reality. When my ex-wife reached out one final time, seeking some semblance of reconciliation, I answered once, with measured calm, and left the conversation at that. The future was mine, no longer entangled with deception, manipulation, or the illusions someone else wanted me to believe. The son who had tried to dictate our lives was forced to confront the consequences of his actions, and I finally could breathe, knowing that no amount of lies could ever touch the truth I now carried. Unyielding, undeniable, and completely my own. It wasn't closure in a dramatic sense. It was closure in reality, the kind that doesn't require forgiveness from others, doesn't hinge on their acceptance, and doesn't bend to their whims. It was closure built on truth, resilience, and unwavering self-respect. And as I walked into the evening, past the flickering streetlights and distant sounds of a city unaware of my battles, I felt the quiet certainty of someone who had faced betrayal, endured, and emerged not broken, but whole. Because at the end of the day, the most powerful victories aren't loud. They're decisive. They're quiet. They're the moments when you refuse to be manipulated, refuse to be coerced, and claim your life back, one undeniable choice at a time.